Hey, good afternoon. Liberty North AP Psych, AP exam testers. Let's go. Especially since, if you did notice in the thumbnail, Quick Trip fountain drinks are back. Yeah, great day. Great day. I'm feeling the best I felt in months, actually. No, just kidding. So that was a welcome surprise. So probably only in Liberty. I know all the KCMO, I don't think they're open yet. So if you guys live on the other side of the bridge, you need to come over to ours. It's all open. Okay. All right. So get out your AP learning targets for chapter 7 and 8. We're going to go over those, and we're going to do both of those today. Not because we're going to skip any information. Chapter 7 is actually pretty limited on the AP exam. So I think it's a 2 to 4% normally. So it's a pretty small portion of it. And the AP learning targets, I think there's only 5 of them. So that one's pretty short. Learning is kind of a middle section that's covered. So it's not one of the top ones that's covered, but it's kind of in the middle. It's usually like 6 to 8%, I think. So these two are not going to be heavily hit on the AP exam. But again, I want you to be ready just in case, even on the essay, if they throw something in here, so they give you an idea on what to focus on. Okay. All right. So chapter 7 is states of consciousness. Right. So basically sleeping is kind of the big thing there. All right. So AP learning targets, which there are only 5, and your vocab. So I'd probably say you don't need to look at your learning targets because I think I've got that summarized right here. But if you want to, just make sure, again, that's your learning targets are the curriculum that will be covered on the test. Okay. But then you need to know your vocab. Your learning targets are basically split up into 2 things. It's either sleeping and dreaming and the processes of both, or it's the psychoactive drugs, okay? Drugs and consciousness, all right? So those are the 2 big areas that you need to know, all right? So you've got sleep, and then you've got drugs and consciousness, okay? All right, your psychoactive drugs, all right? Now, those are the 2 big concept categories that you're gonna need to know for chapter 7. So if you just wanna quickly look over those, you can. So with sleep, again, make sure you know the stages, the process of how it's supposed to occur normally, but then also what happens when it doesn't occur normally, and we have sleep disorders, okay? So narcolepsy is a big one that's hit, insomnia, sleep apnea, those are kind of some of the big ones that are in the chapter that are usually hit, just so you know what those are, okay? So again, make sure dreaming happens in REM sleep, right? Okay, REM sleep. So again, sleep is it's a circadian rhythm, right? So we have sleep periods every 24 hours, right? So we have sleep cycles, just like we have awake cycles, right? With the different brain waves. And then one of those cycles is dreaming, which is rapid eye movement, right? So where we kind of restore the brain, and then in non-rapid eye movement, we restore the body, okay? All right, so, I think we took pretty good notes on that. We took a chart on the sleep process, the circadian rhythm, and so on and so forth. And then we took notes specifically on dreaming as well. So make sure you look at those information or read those few pages in the book. And then you should have sleep disorders specifically listed there. Okay, so you should be good there. All right, and then drugs and consciousness. Again, make sure there's a chart in chapter 7. Let's see if I can, but there's a chart at the end of the chapter. Drugs and consciousness is the last part of the chapter, in which it lists several drugs and their category. So again, remember, stimulants, depressants, and hallucinogens are kind of your 3 main categories of drugs, psychoactive drugs, okay? And just kind of know examples of each and then how each one would affect the brain. Then last thing is basically know your principles of addiction. So tolerance, withdrawal, and dependence, okay? And then dependence can have physical and psychological, right? So if I psychologically depend on the drug, that's psychological dependence. If I physically depend on the drug, that's physical dependence. So we talked about in pain medication, which is a great cultural example. I can be dependent on it in two ways. Number one, if I psychologically depend on it just to be able to calm myself down. So I come home from a busy day of work. I'm not having pain issues, but I just am having problems unwinding, calming down. So I take an opioid, and then that is what calms me down. Okay, so that's psychological dependence. Physical dependence is the only way my body fights pain is if I'm taking the pain medication. Okay, so I've lost the ability to produce endorphins and use endorphins to fight pain. It has to be done with the opioid. Okay, so make sure you know that. I think that's actually a learning target all by itself, the withdrawal, dependence, and tolerance. Okay. All right. So that's pretty much what you need to know for chapter 7. It's a pretty short one. Again, 2 to 4%, only 5 learning targets. So this is a great summary of those learning targets. Okay. All right. And again, I'll send a picture. I'll have a pic of this on Twitter. All right. Then chapter 8, which is learning. Okay. Now, again, just like, I want to make sure that I point out the chapters that have a big name impact. Okay, you need to look at your names for chapter 8. That's the first thing. Okay, so again, just like 11, 4, 8, there are some that are there's big name impact. Okay, so this is a chapter where you could get somebody's name. Okay, so these are the behaviorists. So again, Watson, Skinner, Bandura. Those are the big 3. Pavlov, all right, the big 4. So make sure you keep that. This is also the first chapter we did from second semester, okay? So, but make sure you got your names, all right? Make sure you got them straight, okay? All right, so this chapter is all about behavioral learning, right? Okay, and this is classical conditioning, opera conditioning, observational learning. Okay, those are the big 3 conditioning techniques, learning techniques. So classical is Pavlov and Watson. Operant is Skinner. Observational learning is Bandura. Okay. All right. So make sure, again, you know the elements, the principles of each, and then really make sure that you can apply. All right. That you can apply them, use them in a real life situation or an example that's given or whatever. Or if they give you an example, make sure you can label the parts. Okay. So make sure you can do that. Not that you just know it, but you applied it. And if you go back to your lab for chapter 8, we have a whole lab of you just practicing them and labeling them, okay, which is for this purpose, okay? So go back, look over that. We pounded that in quite a bit. So you've got plenty of examples there to look at there, okay? Again, know your names, all right? Okay, then also know, even though we study it from the foundation and the primary viewpoint or perspective of behavioral learning, that we also need to understand cognitive, biological, and evolutionary learning. Okay, so explanations for learning. So the chapter is based on behavioral learning, but we also need to understand that cognitive, biological, and evolutionary can explain the learning as well. Okay, so cognitive would be that there's thought processes involved, even in conditioning. We could see that. There's biological and evolutionary processes there. So like survival of the fittest. Again, we talked a lot about there are behaviors that we learn instinctively that help our survival, right? And those are more likely to be conditioned. So fear, we talked about food poisoning, taste aversion, okay? Those are all in there. So make sure you know Darwin's name with this as well, evolutionary, okay? And then these 3 right here make up a learning target all by themselves, which we covered. So these are vocab terms I would definitely make sure that you know, because I could see them popping up in one of the tasks. Just apply insight learning or latent learning or social learning to this, okay, to the primary question. So insight learning, again, is just kind of like an aha moment, right? When it's just kind of I look at something and use insight, that creative type of thinking, intuition type of thinking, to solve a problem or learn a behavior, okay? Latent learning is learning that it's taken place, but I'm not demonstrating it until later, till I basically have a reward or I'm given a reason to do it. So we talked about tests, remember? So tests are good examples of both. Like if you come across a question and you just don't know it, but you've got a pretty good insight or a hunch about what the right answer would be insight learning. And then tests overall are latent learning. You're studying the information all chapter. I don't know if you've learned it until I give you the test, and you're not going to demonstrate it until I give you an avenue to demonstrate it. And then the reward or punishment would be the good grade or the bad grade. Okay, so that's latent learning. And then social learning, remember, is Bandura. It's part of observational learning. And this is learning that combines cognitive and behavioral. Okay, so again, social learning theory is cognitive behavioral. Okay, the triangle that Bandura has, reciprocal determinism between the person, the environment, and their cognitive factors. Okay, all right. And then behavior modification, I put that on there. That's actually in a learning target as well. And it's kind of a big, popular, if you will, term in psychology and with AP. This shows up on the test quite often. So basically, it just means I'm using conditioning. I'm using conditioning to change behavior. Basically, that's behavior modification. So if I'm using learning principles to change, modify behavior, it's called behavior modification. Okay, so like we talked about, counter conditioning, right, is behavior modification. Probably the best example of that. So when I'm removing a fear, I'm using learning principles to change or modify behavior. Okay, biofeedback again is the breathing technique that we learned and we practiced with you again using your stomach. Okay, so these are kind of two pretty popular, attractive terms, if you will, that generally kind of pop up on the test. So I want to make sure that you don't leave them out. Okay. Okay. All right. So again, when you're studying and when you're prepping, don't spend a lot of time on chapter 7. Okay, it's 2 to 4%. It's a very small section of the test anyway, and generally they're on multiple choice. So don't live or die by this. This one is 6 to 8%, but chapter is like 8 to 10%, or 10 to 12 actually. Chapter 1, 2, and 4 are huge. So, and then this one is kind of like a medium section. So, be well versed here. I'll probably get some vocab from here. And some names. I bet some names. This could be it's a good chapter for names. Okay. So again, names are 4, 8, and 11. All right. Those are big name chapters. Okay. All right. Okay. So tomorrow is a big day. All right. So tomorrow we'll talk about 9, 10, and 11, and that's the cognitive psychology domain. And that's a big section. That's a 10 to 12% section. So it's going to be heavily hit, and you'll definitely have aspects of that. Probably just like development, chapter 4 and chapters 1 and 2. So 1 has its own question, which is question 2, which is research. And then, almost automatically, there's going to be an element from chapter 2, biology, genetics, 2 and 3. Usually there's developmental, and then this cognitive one, there's probably going to be elements on the test. So it's a big one. Okay, so that's memory, thinking, and intelligence. Okay, that's a huge one. All right. Okay, so we'll do that one tomorrow, and then we're left with 4 chapters, which I'll combine next week, and then we'll be ready to start practicing. Some of you will be testing next week, so good luck. And that's why we'll just live stream tomorrow and do 9, 10, and 11, and then Friday we'll be off, finish work, prep, take a day off, and then we'll do that on Monday and Tuesday. And if you're testing, just watch the video. Okay. Obviously, I had people emailing me questions about the AP test. Again, anytime, email those, contact me with those, and I will respond individually to those questions. Okay. And this will be on Twitter. All right. If you have any questions, let me know.